Nightcast. Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth brings you the current news from the world today and how it relates to Bible prophecy. Understanding the end-time events leading to the peaceful world tomorrow. Ladies and gentlemen, Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth.
Greetings, friends, and welcome to this April 28, 2014 edition of Nightcast. Tonight, as I speak to you, tremendous thunder outside our studio. You might even hear some of that as we're on tonight. We've moved some of our equipment. We're testing out some new backup equipment. I'm going to run from the backup equipment today. The buttons are in a different place temporarily, so I'll have to remember where they are and do a little bit of turning. But let's open up with our news from yesterday. The tornadoes that went through Arkansas and Oklahoma, very deadly tornadoes. I'm sad to report for the United States, our friends in this country. This video you're seeing now shows some aerials. It's drone footage, actually, showing devastation in Arkansas. This aerial footage captured by a drone. Here's one good, helpful use of a drone. It shows the devastation left by a tornado that struck a highway south of Mayflower, Arkansas. Friends, sadly, at least 17 people were killed when a huge storm system swept across the central and southern United States. 16 died in suburbs of Little Rock, the state capital and largest city in Arkansas, officials said. This footage shows queues of vehicles on the debris-covered Interstate 40 on Sunday. And this video footage is courtesy of Brian Emfinger. And then I have a video report provided by the BBC that again mentions these at least 17 people reportedly killed by tornadoes as that huge storm system across central and southern U.S. states hit yesterday. One of the victims was in the town of Kapah in the northeast of Oklahoma, where officials said many buildings were badly damaged. Tornadoes also struck in Nebraska and Kansas and Missouri. John Bryan has this opening report.
The tornado had been predicted days in advance, but that did little to lessen its impact. The town of Mayflower was flattened in just moments. The rest of the night was spent searching for those trapped and tending to the injured.
It was about the scariest thing I've ever been through in my life. Me and my wife and the dog were in the bathroom and the house came down on us.
We're Americans, we're resilient, we're going to snap back, but it's about as bad as it gets.
The storm continued northwards, leaving a trail of destruction in its wake. Daylight revealed the extent of the damage at Quapo in Oklahoma, another place to feel the full force of the twister. The US president has pledged help for devastated communities.
I want everyone affected by this tragedy to know that FEMA and the federal government is on the ground and will help our fellow Americans in need, working with state and local officials. And I want everybody to know that your country will be there to help you recover and rebuild as long as it takes.
Kind of looks like birds, but it's not. It's debris that's flying in the air.
This is just the start of the tornado season. The central and southern states are already taking a severe battering. The fear is that conditions will get even worse before they get better. John Brain, BBC News.
Friends, I relate this story to the fourth seal of Revelation. Let me put a chart up on the screen for you here. I relate it to the fourth seal because Jesus Christ described the activities before the Great Tribulation. Before the fifth seal, he described them as being loimos, which is defined as disease epidemics, pestilence, the plagues. But he also mentioned before the Great Tribulation, he mentioned seismic activity, commotions in the air, commotions on the ground, such as gale force winds of all kinds and earthquakes. And those commotions on the ground would include flooding. The commotions in the air the gale force winds would include these tornadoes. And the name of the rider of the horse of this fourth seal, which is depicted in Revelation as a pale horse whose rider is named Death. Alongside both the rider and the horse alongside them accompanies them Hades, hell, or in other words, the grave, is what Revelation is depicting this horse as doing. A very deadly horse. And this news story out of the southern states, Arkansas, Oklahoma, Missouri, Kansas, being hit with these tornadoes, very deadly. 17 people reported to have been killed. This next story, although not weather in a tornado, it would relate in a deadly way, so it relates to the pale horse in a deadly sense. It also would relate, let's put this chart back up just for a moment, it would also relate to the second seal of Revelation, the red horse, war, rumors of war, even internal warfare within a country, civil type war, as is happening in Egypt. A judge at a mass trial in Egypt has recommended the death penalty for, hope you're sitting down for this, 633 people, including Muslim Brotherhood leader Mohammed Badi. The defendants faced charges over an attack on a police station in Minya in 2013 in which a policeman was killed. However, the judge also commuted to life terms 492 death sentences out of 529 passed in March in a separate case. Orla Gorin reports.
Anguish outside the court. Several women overcome by shock after the judge recommended the death penalty for almost 700 men. It's a preliminary verdict, but a devastating one. My son has done nothing, this mother said. He and others were convicted in a mass trial, which finished in hours. This woman asked God to take revenge on the security forces. They remained impassive. For relatives, there was a double blow. The court upheld 37 death sentences passed last month.
Well, there are extraordinary scenes of grief and anger here. Some of the relatives have been collapsing, having just heard the verdict. It's what they have been dreading. For a month they've been hoping the death sentences against their loved ones would be lifted. Instead, here, almost 40 men have been condemned to hang.
They were convicted of taking part in riots last August, in which a police officer was killed. The violence was ignited when the security forces in Cairo killed hundreds of supporters of the ousted Islamist president, Mohamed Morsi. Essam Durar was convicted of rioting, though he can't even walk. He relies on a wheelchair because of polio. His death sentence was commuted today, like almost 500 others, but he got life in jail. His wife Wafa says their 3 young sons keep asking when daddy's coming home. Our life is pointless without him, she says. Since he's been gone, the children don't want to do anything, not even play. Back at the court, a father cries out to God for help. The international community will be watching closely. Critics may wonder just where Egypt is heading. Orla Guerin, BBC News, Minya.
And friends, the situation in other parts of the world, over in Europe, it remains very volatile over there. A demonstration in support of Ukrainian unity in the eastern city of Donetsk has been violently broken up by pro-Russian militants. Several people were wounded when a few hundred men dressed in military fatigues and wielding baseball bats and iron bars and letting off firecrackers waded into the pro-Ukrainian rally. Sarah Rainsford reports from Donetsk.
The crowd here have been shouting for a free and for a united Ukraine. That's been one of the main chants. They've also been shouting, Putin, hands off Ukraine. They are concerned, people I've been talking to, about the chance that this country could be divided. And a lot of young people here are very concerned about their future.
Patriotic girl. I think that Ukraine must be only united Ukraine and Russian must go home. I think that today it will be a peaceful demonstration because look to these people. Everybody was smiling and flags of Ukraine.
The crowd have been chanting and singing all the way up the street here. They've been shouting for a united Ukraine. They say we are united and we can't be defeated. And some pretty crude chants as well about President Putin. He's not a popular man with this crowd at all. They've been shouting Putin go home and a lot of other things that can't be repeated. So far, the march is peaceful, though there are riot police accompanying them all the way. They're planning to march around 1 kilometre up the street here to a local shopping centre. It suddenly turned nasty here. There's pro-Russian groups here with metal bars, with baseball bats. And it's a big crowd. They're following the pro-Ukrainian demonstrators up the street. The riot police are letting a lot of them past, even though they're trying to keep the street itself closed. There's lots of these pro-Russian groups, young men, most of them, with big sticks, and they're getting around the sides.
Thank you, Sarah. And we also have a report out of Donetsk and another eastern Ukrainian town from Steve Rosenberg.
In eastern Ukraine, it takes courage now to hold up the flag of your own country. In Donetsk tonight, they'd come out to call for a united Ukraine. Just wait 5 minutes, this man says, then we'll show you. Pro-Russia groups attacked with tear gas, firecrackers and baseball bats. The police did nothing to stop this. Minutes later, the March for Unity had been battered into submission. The violence here is escalating. Earlier, the mayor of Kharkiv, Ukraine's second largest city, was shot in the back on this road. He's fighting for his life in hospital. When the BBC filmed the mayor, Gennady Kernes, in February, he was considered pro-Russian. Supporters of Kiev were blocking his office. Since then, he's become a critic of the old government and a supporter of a unified Ukraine. But you won't find many of those here. In Konstantinovka today, we found pro-Russia militants had seized the council building and the local police station. As they built the barricades, the crowd sang about the USSR.
The militia that has seized control here says they had no trouble at all taking this building. They simply turned up and walked in. There was no security, no one to stop them.
Vladimir told me the military operation wouldn't stop here. Maybe we'll celebrate New Year in Lvov in western Ukraine, he says, or maybe in Brussels or Berlin. And the men with guns are confident that most people here are on their side. Steve Rosenberg, BBC News, Eastern Ukraine.
And friends, while that goes on in Europe, elsewhere in the Middle East, the violence continues there, kind of overshadowed in a way by what's happening in Ukraine, but the violence has been continuing in Syria. Journalist Ian Pennell and cameraman Darren Conway were the first Western broadcasters to access the city this year. Emergency rescue teams told them that residents were living in danger and fear and reported thousands of casualties.
Engulfed by darkness and fear, the heart of Syria's biggest city. But life's become so dangerous that drivers must turn off their lights to avoid attack from above. And even in the dead of night, the war grinds on. The government insists it's protecting people, targeting terrorists based in residential areas. But often it's civilians who are hit. Everyone keeps an eye on the sky, looking for helicopters armed with barrel bombs that are tossed to the ground. They're indiscriminate and devastating. Whenever they land, it's the civil defense force that comes to the rescue. Their job's as grim as it is dangerous. Rushing in, sometimes under fire, to free the injured and recover the dead. Barrel bombs are believed to have killed hundreds of people in Aleppo this year, maiming many more. This video from the Aleppo Media Centre is extraordinary. The defence force desperately claw at debris. A young boy's been buried. His limbs are freed. It's not clear if he's alive. Suddenly, there's movement. And 9-year-old Yamin is rescued. This was Syria's...
Okay, and we'll come out of it right there. That was a wonderful to see that rescue of that child. But violence continues there. The BBC team we mentioned got rare access to Aleppo, from which they provided this report. And there's violence in many other places around the world. In Taiwan, yesterday, police used water cannon for a second day to try to disperse hundreds of anti-nuclear protesters who've been blocking a main traffic route in the capital, Taipei. Thousands of demonstrators gathered yesterday to demand the government, yesterday being Sunday, to demand the government stop construction of the country's 4th nuclear power plant. Cindy Su reports from Taipei.
Once a rare scene, this is now becoming common on the streets of Taipei. Police dispersing protesters with water cannons. At its peak, on Sunday afternoon, more than 28,000 demonstrators occupy some of the busiest streets in the Taiwanese capital. The authorities feared a repeat of the unprecedented student occupation of parliament that only just ended earlier this month. Then early on Monday, once again, police used water cannons. They managed to disperse most of the protesters by the time commuters were heading to work. Opponents of the nuclear power plant say it's dangerous given that Taiwan is in an earthquake zone. The site is located just 30 kilometers from Taipei. 6.5 million people live nearby. Supporters, including the government and business community, argue that the plant is much safer than Fukushima. They insist it's needed as Taiwan's 3 other plants are getting old and are close to being decommissioned. Officials say the country relies on nuclear power for around 18% of its electricity. They warn of power shortages and higher electricity bills without it. But that doesn't concern these demonstrators. They fear the plant will begin operating soon. They vow to keep the pressure up on the government until it agrees to scrap the plant. With local elections later this year, the debate is set to become even more heated in the politically divisive society of Taiwan. Cindy Su, BBC News, Taipei.
And friends, in Africa, peacekeepers have escorted a convoy of more than 1,200 Muslims out of the capital of the Central African Republic. Some of the last remaining Muslims in Bangui were targeted by Christian militias in the country's civil conflict. The CAR has been hit by unrest since Seleka rebels ousted the president in March last year. Alpa Patel reports.
Muslim families packing up, getting ready to leave their homes. They are no longer welcome here. This group are some of the last Muslims to leave this neighbourhood in Bangui. They have been stuck here for months, unable to flee due to threats against their lives. This operation was made possible under the watchful eye of peacekeepers and the international press. Some say they will leave the country for good.
They've killed a lot of Muslims. We can't stay here in the Central African Republic. We will leave to save ourselves, to save our skin.
The violence began in March 2013 when Muslim rebels seized power and were accused of committing atrocities against the country's Christian majority. In January of this year, rebel leader and the first Muslim president, Michel Djokovic, resigned, accused of not doing enough to prevent the killings. The situation resulted in revenge attacks by the mainly Christian anti-Balaka militia. The cycle of violence has forced 1 million people from their homes. Back in Bangui and under the protection of armed peacekeepers, the convoys leave to the relative safety of 2 towns in the north of the country. As they do, people start cheering, chanting, "Christians, Christians, Christians." Muslim homes are looted. What is not ransacked is burned. This Christian man says, "It's regrettable, but we can't do anything about it, because they're the ones who brought weapons. We lived together for years, but they brought weapons to kill us." And so, there seems no end to the cycle of violence, which has left this country deeply divided. Alpa Patel, BBC News.
Friends, another chapter has passed in the hunt for the missing Malaysian airliner MH370, with the Australian Prime Minister announcing the end of the aerial search. Prime Minister Tony Abbott said that a much larger area of the ocean floor would now be targeted, but he said it was highly unlikely any surface wreckage would be found. And he suspended the aerial searches. You'll hear that in this report with John Donison in Sydney.
More than 7 weeks on, and still nothing. There have been more than 300 search flights. They've covered more than 4.5 million kilometres. But now, the aerial operation has been called off.
It is highly unlikely at this stage that we will find any aircraft debris on the ocean surface. By this stage, 52 days into the search, most material would have become waterlogged and sunk. And with the distances involved, all of the aircraft are operating at close to the limit of sensible and safe operation. Therefore, we are moving from the current phase to a phase which is focused on searching the ocean floor over a much larger area.
And that underwater search is being forced to expand massively. Previously it was covering a relatively small area of around 300 square kilometres. Now that's increasing to around 60,000 square kilometres. That's roughly 40 times the size of London. The search teams will continue to use this automated submarine, the Bluefin 21, which uses sonar to scan the ocean floor. But it only moves at a few kilometres an hour. The next phase is going to take time.
If everything goes perfectly, I would say we'll be doing well if we do it in 8 months.
And it won't be cheap. Private contractors will now be brought in to help. The next phase of the search alone is expected to cost around $60 million on top of what's already been spent. But for the families of the passengers, the cost is immeasurable. The closure they seek remains remote. John Donison, BBC News in Sydney.
Friends, you know President Barack is on an Asian tour, and he arrives in the Philippines shortly on the final leg of the Asian tour as the two sides signed a military cooperation deal. The accord, signed in Manila, allows a bigger U.S. military presence in the Southeast Asian nation. It comes with Manila embroiled in a bitter territorial dispute with Beijing over parts of the South China Sea. Rupert Wingfield Hayes reports.
This is the South China Sea, one of the most contested bits of water on Earth. We're heading out towards the rich fishing grounds around the Scarborough Shoals, a coral atoll about 100 miles off the Philippine coast. These men used to fish there every spring, but now they are too scared to go back.
Chinese Coast Guard will say, go away, go away.
Mario's boat has been sprayed by water cannon and threatened with machine guns. China claims the whole of the South China Sea as its own, this huge tongue-shaped line going right up to the edge of the Philippines. It's building facilities on coral atolls to defend its claims.
Need help kasi
Our government is weak, he says.
China.
It cannot defend us against China. That's why we really need America's help. Out here in the South China Sea, these Filipino fishermen are facing the new reality of Chinese power. Small countries like the Philippines, which barely has a navy to speak of, simply have no way to face up to China's new power by itself. And that's why it's turning back to its old colonial master, the United States, for help. This is Clark Field, 50 miles north of Manila. It was once the biggest American airbase outside the United States. Relics of the Cold War era are now a site for picnicking. But at the height of the Cold War, 15,000 Americans lived here. Not everyone is happy about the idea of them coming back. In a nearby village, farmers from a left-wing peasant group are meeting. They think the US is using the China threat as an excuse.
The US is trying to create an issue so that they can go back here in the Philippines. They would like to go back here in the Philippines to use the Philippines as their base and to get all the resources here and even all the Asian countries. They use as their base.
There are many in the Philippines who will welcome the Americans back with open arms. But those who campaigned to get the US out of here 20 years ago feel like this is turning back the clock. Rupert Wingfield Hayes, BBC News, in the northern Philippines.
Prince, thank you for joining us tonight, this Monday evening, 28th of April report. God willing, and the creek don't rise. We'll be back again tomorrow night, Tuesday night, with the current day's news related to the Bible and prophecy here on Nightcast. Until next time, Lloyd Gilbreth saying, so long, friends.
You have been watching Nightcast with Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth. Nightcast can be seen Sunday through Thursday nights here on COGTV.org. Tonight's program is also available anytime on demand in the cogtv.org video archive.